Good evening. If you want to turn in your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 12, that's where we'll be starting. It's good to be with you all here on this Sunday afternoon. And the weather report is that we have no idea what's going on. We have no idea why I'm wearing a sweater at the beginning of May. It doesn't make any sense. Like this, by this time in Florida, it was like 90 degrees. It was the low. So it's like this kind of memory of that is a very faint and distant memory. But now all we have is 48 degrees on May the 4th. So there you go. There's this week's report. This lesson is technically not following the pattern of what I had been doing on the first of the month, which is I had been doing a lesson kind of from where we're at in the Bible reading plans that you can get on the front here, just as kind of a monthly reminder to join into that and like hop on it and just dive into the story of the Bible. And with this lesson, the reason I'm doing this one is, for one reason, is because 2 weeks ago we had some latrine issues, and so therefore I did not end up speaking, and this was the lesson that I had prepared for that evening. And also, where we're at on the reading plan is the beginning of 1 Chronicles, I think, was this Sunday. And if you aren't familiar with the first 9 chapters of 1 Chronicles, it's just genealogies for like literally 9 chapters. It's just a bunch of names. And also, a funny thing is, I technically did a lesson on that, and that's part of the unofficial series of taking the weird parts, strange parts of the Bible, and making a sermon out of it. But so go back and listen to that sermon on First Chronicles and the genealogies if you want to dive into that part of the reading plan. But that's the disclaimer to do the reading plan. Reminder, hop into it, go at it. But tonight, the lesson will be waiting. I mean, you could feel it. I was feeling that right there, right? Just to waiting, the tension of that. Like you could already almost feel how awkward it was getting, and I was getting sweaty up here. But I mean, so yeah, y'all think that was tough. Imagine me right now. And that was only like a few seconds. Like I just paused for like a few seconds, and you could feel it, like in the air. Waiting is something that, especially in the world of today, with short form video content and text message and like phone calls and this thingamajig right here, just in general, of like speed, quickness, fast food, fast answers, let's go, 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 and that's something that's very much an American thing. Like go efficiency. Like we invented the assembly line, y'all. Like that started like right here in the Midwest. And that was about efficiency, make it as fast as possible, mass produce, like there you go. And waiting is a lost, like this thing called boredom, like that's a lost experience. Like I believe it's my generation, technically, is the last ones that had a childhood without an iPhone or any sort of like an easy access immediately to the internet. And like I remember sitting in the mall with my mom, and there were these certain types of chairs that had this pattern on them that was like a grid, and I would just trace my finger around it. And that was my entertainment. Like it was a good time. And she would be like shopping, and then I would just like sit at a chair and like trace my finger on the pattern. Like that was it. Like that's all I had. But it's with this idea of waiting. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of do 2 character studies. And the 2 character studies are about 2 people that kind of contrast each other, and then we're looking at 4 characters, and 2 guys contrast each other, and the other 2 contrast each other, and they're kind of both the same characters. And I promise it'll make sense. Let's just dive right into it. So here in 1 Samuel chapter 12, we're going to look at 2 kings, beginning with this one in 1 Samuel chapter 12. The prophet Samuel is speaking to the people of Israel. And what has just happened in the chapters prior to this is he has anointed a guy named Saul as king. And here in chapter 12, we find out the reason why Saul was anointed as king. And it says that there was this king called Nahash. If you look in 2 Samuel chapter 12, look at verse 2. 2 Samuel chapter 12, look at verse 12. It says, "But you saw that Nahash, the king of the sons of Ammon, came up against you. And so you said to me, no, but a king shall reign over us, although Yahweh your God was your king." Now this is a little interesting tidbit here, but the name Nahash is spelled with the same letters as the word for serpent, as the serpent that was in the garden. The serpent is pronounced Nahash, and this guy's name is Nahash. It's like barely a difference at all. This is the serpent king. And they see this serpent king, Nahash, coming against them, and the people are like, hey, we want a king that'll go out and fight for us like that guy. And so he says, but you said a king shall reign over us, a king like that guy. So therefore, look at verse 13. Behold, now the king whom you have chosen, whom you have asked for, behold, Yahweh has set a king over you. And that's Saul. Saul, in the chapter before this, actually looked really good. Like, he looked like he was actually going to be a pretty good king, because he goes out and fights Nahash, and he beats him. He defeats him, he sends him running, and it's like Saul's conquering like the power of the serpent. He kills the serpent king. But sadly, how long does this last? Like, turn the page in your Bible. Chapter 13. Look at chapter 13, and let's begin reading verses 8 through 14. So Saul is now headed out to do this next thing that he was commanded to do when he was anointed as king, which was destroy this garrison of the Philistines. And he's going out to fight the Philistines, and you have to wait. You have to wait, because he's waiting on Samuel. And Samuel said he was going to come and offer a sacrifice, and kind of as like a blessing as they go forth into battle. And so, verse 8 of 1 Samuel chapter 13, starting in verse 8, so he waited, that is Saul waited, 7 days, according to the appointed time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattering from him. So, this is a problem, right? People are scattering. Saul's got to go fight a battle. You want people with you in many numbers possible when you go to battle. Like, just tidbit, whenever you're heading out to war, you want numbers. That's a rule of thumb, biblical wisdom right there. And so when he's going out to battle, the people begin to scatter because Samuel hasn't come. It's like we're missing our point. Like, we're missing the chance to strike here. And so Saul says, bring near to me the burnt offering and the peace offerings. And so he offered up the burnt offering. And then now verse 10. And as soon as he finished the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. And Saul went out to meet him to greet him. But Samuel says to him, he says, what is this that you have done? And Saul said, because I saw the people scattering from me, and that you did not come within the appointed days, and the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, therefore I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not entreated the favor of Yahweh, so I forced myself and offered the burnt offering. And Samuel said, you've acted foolishly, and you didn't keep the commandment of your God, which he commanded you. For now Yahweh would have established your kingdom with Israel and forever. But now your kingdom shall not endure, and Yahweh has sought out for himself a ruler over sought out for himself a man after his own heart, and Yahweh has appointed him as a ruler over his people, because you have not kept the way that Yahweh commanded you. And so here we have kind of Saul's first test, and it doesn't pass the test. And if we keep reading through, keep your thoughts towards chapter 28 that's on the screen there. But I want to go to this next story first, just a couple chapters over. In fact, this is the third time that Saul is tested. We're bypassing a couple of another moment in the middle here. But here's a classic story of Saul with the Amalekites. And he's sent out to punish Amalek. So a little history here. Amalek, when the people of Israel, they came up out of Egypt, and they were kind of a newly formed nation, just wandering in the wilderness. Amalek struck and tried to attack them in their moment of weakness. And they didn't just strike a people group who were slaves that had barely formed outside of in their own community, but they struck the train, the end of their company, which who stays in the back? Who stays in the back of a long caravan? The children, the expectant mothers, the elderly. They attack the weakest at the weakest point. These people that's the kind of society that Amalek is. And God says, I won't forget it. I'll visit them and punish them. And so Saul is now supposed to be executing that punishment. And instead, what does he do? He leaves some of the best. Look at verse 26. Back up to verse earlier on in verse 13. So Samuel comes and visits after the battle. And then when Saul sees him coming in verse 13, he says, and Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, blessed are you of Yahweh, I've established the word of Yahweh. And Samuel said, what then is the sound of sheep in my ears, and the sound of oxen which I'm hearing? And Saul says, oh, they have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and oxen to sacrifice to Yahweh your God, but the rest we have devoted to destruction. And Samuel said to Saul, wait, And let me tell you what Yahweh has spoken to me last night. And he said to him, Speak. And Samuel said, Is it not true that though you were little in your own eyes, that you were made head of the tribes of Israel? And Yahweh anointed you over Israel as king? And Yahweh sent you on a mission, said, Go, devote to destruction the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed. Why then did you not obey the voice of Yahweh, but rushed upon the spoil and did what was evil in the eyes of Yahweh? And now notice how Saul responds once again. In verse 20, Then Saul said to Samuel, I did obey the voice of Yahweh, and I went on the way which Yahweh had sent me, and brought back Agag, king of the Amalekites, and devoted Amalekites to destruction. But the people, they took some of the spoil, the sheep, the oxen, the choicest of the things they devoted to destruction, to sacrifice to Yahweh your God at Gilgal. And now this is kind of the key moment in the story here. Look at verse 22 and 23. Samuel says, Has Yahweh as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as obeying the voice of Yahweh? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and insubordination is as wickedness and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of Yahweh, he has also rejected you from becoming king. And so here, Saul just kind of keeps getting more and more isolated as the story goes on. And that's where I want us to land his story in chapter 28. It's a very haunting story. And it opens up, it's not just a haunting, pun intended, because it's a very spooky, strange story. In the beginning of this chapter, it said it happened in those days that the Philistines, they gathered in armed camps for war to fight against Israel. And then Achish said to David, No, surely we will go with the camp with all of your men. And now, here's the problem. Verse 3, Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented over him and buried him at Ramah, his own city. And Saul had removed from that land mediums and spiritists. So, all the sorcery was put out of the land. But here's the problem. Samuel's dead, and Samuel's a prophet of Yahweh. Samuel was kind of Saul's, only link left to communication with God. And what Saul does is he begins to seek the word of the Lord. He's trying to figure out what he's supposed to do, and he can't find any answer from God. And it's extremely ironic because obviously we've skipped over 15 chapters in between now and the last story. And in between that time, Saul has annihilated the city of the priests. He basically sent a guy out to destroy all of the priests of God. And he completely annihilated all the servants of God in the tabernacle. And so then now Saul is looking to communicate with God, and he can't find any way to communicate with him. And you're like, I wonder why. Saul's an example of kind of a narcissistic self-destruction. If you notice with his image, whenever Samuel was trying to be why have you not done this? Why have you not done that? What does he start to do? This one and that one. The people. You know them, that they are the ones who preserve the good stuff to offer sacrifices to Yahweh. And then now here, Saul's basically finding himself lonely on top of a hill, all on his own, not having any word from Yahweh, and now his final link, Samuel, is gone. And so what does he do? He turns to the spiritists. He turns to what's called a witch in the place of Endor. And so what happens? Let's look down in 1 Samuel chapter 28. Look at verse 12. Let's start reading in verse 12. Actually, back up to verse 11. Saul goes to the spiritist, and the woman says to him, Whom shall I bring up for you? She's like a necromancer. And he said, Bring up Samuel for me. So the woman saw Samuel and cried out with a loud voice. And the woman said to Saul, Why have you deceived me? For you are the king, Saul. And then the king said to her, Don't be afraid. Tell me what you see. And the woman said to Saul, I see a spirit. I see a divine being coming up out of the earth. And he said to him, What is the form? He says, It's an old man wrapped in a robe. And Saul knew that it was Samuel. And so he bowed his face before him. And here's to make the long story short. Saul's like, I can't get any word from Yahweh. And just think about it. Saul, in the beginning, wouldn't wait long enough to receive the prophet's word and blessing in the sacrifice. And now what do we see him as? Again, he's not waiting. He's just trying to grasp at anything possible to receive communication from God, desperately, as he's finding himself completely alone. And what does Samuel say to him? This is what I meant when I said this is a very haunting story. Is Samuel comes up and he says to Saul basically the exact same thing we read earlier on. Rebellion is the sin of divination. Saul's rebellion back there in chapter 15, where does it end him now in chapter 28? Literally associating with divination and with a witch and asking her to work her sorcery to bring up Samuel. And then Samuel, it's the last line of Samuel to Saul before he vanishes back into death, is he says, tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. And you're like, ooh, that sends shivers down my spine every time. Is this ghostly form of Samuel basically tells Saul, you're going to be with me tomorrow. And what does Saul do? Is he sits and he has a meal after this. He falls down, he passes out, and then he wakes up and he has a meal with the witch. And meals are about like fellowship, association. This meal that we had this morning is about our connection to that one who gave us this meal. Like this isn't just he's like grabbing a quick bite and leaving. This is about he's now aligned himself with the sorcerous powers of evil. And that's where it leaves Saul. And how does his life end? 2 pages over in chapter 31, he falls on his own sword. That's kind of the end of this lifestyle. Self-destruction. And that's the end of Saul. But to contrast that, 1 Samuel 16, turn back a little bit. What did God promise? There would be one to come after a king after his own heart. And that's what we find here in 1 Samuel chapter 16. In verses 1 through 13, we read the story of a boy named David. And he was the youngest of 7 other brothers. And David is taken aside by Samuel and is anointed as king. And this is a really cool image that I had never really thought about until this afternoon. We were kind of reviewing this story in an afternoon class, been going through the whole story of the Bible. But David is anointed as king in the midst of the reign of King Saul, like the unchosen king, the king that's kind of like being in rebellion. That's when David is anointed king. It's kind of, I don't know, I think it's maybe a little bit of a foreshadowing of the true son of David, right? Who becomes the king right in the middle of this time of death. Like Christ is king of the world right now. Amen? King of heaven and earth. All authority has been given to him. But it's like right in the middle of when it's still like we're still in the world, right? But he's the king. Right in the midst of the darkness, Christ is anointed as the king. And right here in the midst of the reign of Saul, David is now the anointed one of God. And God says that man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. And that's what he says about David. And he says, I've rejected all these other older brothers who look much more qualified and strong and tall, dark, handsome. But David, this ruddy young shepherd boy, is the one who's going to be the king. And so then, David himself, throughout the rest of the book of 1 Samuel, it's like he's in this long test of waiting, like Saul. Because Saul's the anointed one, right? He's also the king. And David refuses to reach out and to strike Saul and destroy him. He says, it's the Lord's anointed. I'm not going to touch him. If you will, turn over to chapter 24. We'll just look at this one. But it happens twice, where Saul is basically at the mercy of David. He's right in David's hand. And what does David do? In this one, this is kind of one of those it's just extremely ironic what happens. Is Saul gets word that David is hiding in this cave, or not in the cave, but in this certain region. And so he goes out there and he's trying to find him, and David and his company, they hide in the back of this cave. And then you got to think of the picture here. They're thinking they're cornered, they're about to get destroyed. They see a silhouette at the front of the cave, and Saul, he comes into the cave, and it's like, it's over. He's going to find us. And then he pauses, and they're like, what's going on? What's he doing? And he starts to use the bathroom. What goes on in this story? It's in the Bible. It's kind of a funny story. And David sneaks up, like as Saul has left his cloak to the side and is taking care of business. David goes to Saul's cloak, and he cuts off an edge of it. Like he's close enough to Saul that like he could have finished it right there if he wanted to, because he is anointed king right here. But David doesn't do it. He lets God handle it. He waits on the Lord. And so Saul, in the way the story concludes, basically David comes out of the cave and he almost feels remorse for doing that, for even cutting off the corner of Saul's robe. And he says, look, I had the opportunity and I didn't do it. Why are you chasing me? And Saul has this moment of repentance, but then, as noted on the screen, he's hunting him like 2 chapters later again. Saul, he loses his mind. The rest of 1 Samuel is just the decline of Saul until he falls on his own sword. And then what do we find? But that he receives the promise. And in 2 Samuel chapter 5, that's where you read about David taking up the throne and his consummation as king. So these two kings, these two case studies here, these two men, these two anointed ones. One of them has a moment where there's 7 days of waiting. And he can't wait any longer. And so he goes forth and he does what he thinks needs to be done. And then the other one, many years of waiting, refuses to take out and strike the one who's his enemy, but rather leaves it up to God to execute justice. And as he waits for the Lord, he eventually finds that the promise that God said comes true, that he would be the king over all of Israel. So to move on to our next example, now two brothers. Hop all the way to Matthew chapter 27. Matthew chapter 27. Here we have two brothers, and both of these stories take place on the same evening, the same time. And one of them is one of Jesus' closest disciples, one of the 12, one of the chosen apostles to go with him, stay near him, to be like the establishment of the kingdom of God as it's taking up, and Jesus is leading the way, and it's moving here and there, seeing the miracles, watching the healings, hearing the teaching. This guy was with him the entire time. And yet he betrays him. This is Judas. Whenever Jesus says, one of you will betray me, it wasn't obvious who it was, whatever the case. They all asked, Lord, is it I? Like, is it going to be me? But if you look here in Matthew chapter 27, look down into verse 3. We see a tragic story that after Jesus is betrayed by Judas and he's put on trial and then he's condemned, it says that they bound him, they led him away to Pilate the governor, and then Judas, the one who betrayed him, he saw he had been condemned, and he felt remorse. And he returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders, saying, I've sinned by betraying innocent blood. And they said to him, what is that to us? You see to that yourself. And then he threw the pieces of silver into the sanctuary, and he departed, and he went away, and he hung himself. And then we see the exact same pattern as we saw with Saul. Judas self-destructs. After his betrayal, he takes the matter into his own hands. And it's tragic. When we were in Rome, there was a lot of few depictions of the Last Supper, depictions of the 12 apostles, and Judas would always kind of be in the corner, and he's like got dark clothing and like a hood and like things like that. And you're like, yeah, there's Judas. Like, you can tell it's him because he looks suspicious. And it's like, no. Like, this is one of the brothers, one of the closest followers of Jesus. And not only that, he has genuine remorse, it says, whenever he runs and he throws the money into the temple. But how he responds after that is the tragedy. He goes out and he hangs himself. And so then, parallel to this is another brother. If you look back in the chapter right before this, one of Jesus' closest apostles, and actually like not just one of the 12, but like one of the 3 closest to Jesus, that would often go with him to see like the intimacy of when he healed Jairus' daughter. Only James, John, and Peter went into that room. At the Mountain of Transfiguration, only James, John, and Peter were there. When Jesus was praying alone in Gethsemane, only James, John, and Peter were there. And Peter, one of the earliest disciples, one of the first 4 that were called, he denies Jesus. Look at chapter 26. It says, Peter was sitting, this is verse 69, Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him and said, you too were with Jesus the Galilean. But he denied it before them all, saying, I don't know what you're talking about. And then when he had gone into the gateway, another servant girl saw him and said to those who were there, this man was with Jesus of Nazareth. And he denied it again with an oath. He says, I don't know the man. And then a little while later, one of the bystanders, they came up to Peter and said, surely you too are one of them, for even the way that you talk gives you away. And immediately he began to curse and to swear. He says, I do not know the man. And immediately the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the words which Jesus had said to him, before a rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and he cried bitterly. I don't think it's an accident that Matthew, when he wrote his gospel, put these 2 stories back to back. Because if you look, it's a chapter break, but it goes from Peter's betrayal and denial to Judas's remorse after his betrayal. But the difference is what these 2 do in response. One of them takes it into his own hands. The other one sits in it. Like, he goes out and he weeps bitterly. But what does he find on the other side of this? John chapter 21. This is just one of the most beautiful post-resurrection stories in the Gospels. 3 times Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, comes to Peter, and he says to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And he says, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my lambs." And he said a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And he said to him, "Shepherd my sheep." And he said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" But Peter was grieved because he said to him a third time, "Do you love me?" He said to him, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." 3 times, Peter denies that he even knew Jesus. And then now 3 times, Jesus asks him the question of, "Do you love me?" And then 3 times, Simon responds, "Yes, you know that I do." And he actually receives, like, not just redemption, but restoration and recommission on the other side of this from the resurrected Lord himself. But he had to wait 3 days for that. And maybe even who knows how long, because they go back up to, this scene is taking place back up in Galilee before he has this moment with Jesus. And instead of tragically like his other brother Judas waiting, Peter, though, he waited for his Lord. And he found redemption and restoration on the other side. And so now just 3 kind of quick takeaways from these two comparisons of 4 characters that I think are also kind of 2 characters that are the same. Maybe that made sense. Hopefully we've been following along with this together. But to begin, when it comes to waiting on the Lord, I think what we see with these stories of hope, like with David and like with Peter, so just listen to his promises. Peter's one of the ones that first said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." He saw the Mount of Transfiguration. He heard him say, "I will suffer and die." So you have to think that there's part of Peter that's also thinking that waiting. It's like just to see what comes of this. Jesus did tell them 3 different times in the Gospels that he was going to suffer and die and rise on the 3rd day. And he listened to that and he kept it until he saw him again, resurrected. And then also the promise of David. Whenever God said to him, he anointed him through his prophet Samuel, said, "You're going to be the new king of Israel." Sure didn't look like it. Sure did not look like it. Youngest of 7 brothers, a shepherd out in the field. What were the odds that that would be the case and that would actually come to be? But he becomes the king of all of Israel. And not only that, he gets into a covenant with God where God promises that one of his descendants will sit on his throne forever. And the one who came from David is the son of David, Jesus of Nazareth. And so listen to the promises of God in waiting on him. The other is just clinging to him. In all these moments of David, when he was wandering around in the wilderness, there's a few of the Psalms that I encourage you to go read where he is writing these Psalms in the midst of that pursuit. While David's in the wilderness, he's not saying like, "Woe is me," like if Saul would just leave me alone, like why is God not like seeing this and doing this? He's like writing these Psalms of like, "Lord, I trust in you. You deliver me from my enemies. Your eye is over all of us." Some of the songs we sang tonight for the lesson come from the Psalms. And it's that God is watching over, he's promised, he's faithful. The one who promised is faithful. So just cling to him in the midst of the waiting. When it seems like things aren't as the way they should be, wait on him. In the midst of failure like Peter, cling to him, wait on him. And then that's the last point, is wait for him. You can't emphasize this enough. So many times the failures in the Bible are simply because they don't wait on the Lord. From the beginning, like with Abraham and Sarah, the moment when they try to take and they try to make a child on their own terms, it's because they hadn't received a child from God yet. And so then in Genesis 16, there's all this terrible stuff that happens with Hagar. They abused her. She's sent out. Her son almost died. It's just this whole mess. And it's all because they were trying to do their own thing. Later on, we're in the middle of the story of Jacob. I'm teaching that to someone right now. And Jacob, his entire life, is just trying to structure things so that he can receive the blessing. And like at the very beginning, before he was born, God says to his mother that, look, the older will serve the younger. Jacob's the younger one. he's the one whom the blessing will go through. And Jacob's always wrestling with God and trying to strive and to eke out a blessing for himself. And God is just constantly saying to him, look, I'm with you. I'm going to bless you. I'm with you. I made a covenant with you just like I made a covenant with your father and your father before and his father before him. And then he's just always like going, trying to do his own thing. And then later on, as we read about with Saul, as we read about in the moment later on with David, is all of the moments of failure are simply a matter of waiting on the Lord. One of the most beautiful moments is at the edge of the Red Sea. They've got the depth of it's dark, it's night, the waters are in front of them, Pharaoh's pressing in behind them. And then what does God tell the Israelites to do through Moses? Stand still, wait, and see the salvation of the Lord. I'll close out with this verse. If you want to go to Lamentations, the book of Lamentations, chapter 3. Lamentations, chapter 3. Because a lot of times, especially in the book of Lamentations, this is in the midst of the destruction of Jerusalem. It looks like everything is a dead-end road in darkness. And whenever we find ourselves in that place where it looks like all of our options forward are just darkness and death, the best option is probably to repent, which means turn around. Because you can find yourself in places where if any road forward just looks like death and darkness, maybe you just need to wait, like the Israelites at the sea. Stand still, wait, and see the salvation of the Lord. And here in the very middle of Lamentations, is the very center of the book, and it's been grieving and mourning over the loss of Jerusalem, and it seems like the promises of God are not being fulfilled. It says that my soul, this is Lamentations chapter 3, verse 17, my soul has been rejected from peace. I've forgotten goodness. I've said my strength has perished, as well as my hopeful waiting, which comes from Yahweh. Remember my affliction and my homelessness, the wormwood and the gall. Surely my soul remembers and is bowed down within me. This I will return to my heart. Therefore I will wait in hope. The loving kindness, the steadfast love, the faithfulness of Yahweh, indeed it never ceases. His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Yahweh is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I wait for him. Yahweh is good to those who hope for him, and the soul that diligently seeks him. It is good that he waits silently for the salvation of Yahweh. It is good for a man that he should bear the yoke in his youth. Let him sit alone and be silent, since he has laid it upon him. And so, now as we come to the end of the lesson, it's in the rush of this world, and in the moments of darkness and despair, wait on the Lord. He doesn't ask us to run with him. He, honestly, most of the time he asks for us to walk with him. Either walk or wait on him. So that's the encouragement for all of us tonight. Wait on the Lord. And if there's anyone who finds yourself at the end of the road, in the midst of the darkness, now is the time to step out and begin walking with him. If you need to respond to the gospel call and be baptized into the waters for forgiveness of sins, we invite you to do that now. And if there's anyone here tonight who's wandered away from him and you're going down paths that only look like they lead into darkness and death, now's the time to turn around and to come back for him because, well, he waits for you as well. So if there's anyone who needs to respond, we ask you to come now as we stand and as we sing.